Hello guys, and welcome to another multiple apps workflow tutorial with me, Eldon from Lodge and Lemire. This is chapter 11 of our production pipeline series, and we're almost at the home stretch here. Chapters 11 through 14 are going to go over some key final points that have you guys rendering basically on your own render farm or kind of in a pseudo batch kind of sort of way. If you just have one computer and you just need to compute like a bunch of files or send them off to maybe a friend or something like that. Alright, so chapter 11 here, today I would like to go over HDRI workflows with Photoshop and After Effects in C4DtoA. And to that end, I've created this simple scene. Now, I recently did a scene for a client where I had to do some motion graphics text or whatever. And I was at a loss as to how I would initially create some sort of really cool kind of sort of abstract looking background. And so at first I decided to try to go with the Most Spline and use it to create like a lot of Most Splines and have them do some really interesting parametric animation in the background. But I found that to be a wee bit slow. Arnold's spline primitives are really great. And you'll use those predominantly for things like hair or certain filament type of things. I once used it for some webbing for a certain famous character at one point. But a lot of them with some of the other things that I wanted to have in the scene as well kind of sort of bogged it down. So I came up with this really cool technique. And it's a really great way that you can use to light up your scenes. So here in After Effects, I basically created this layout that's using a bit of a fractal noise and a few other effects to basically create a animated fractal landscape here of sorts, almost a flamey or dreamy kind of sort of murky type of look. This is not really an After Effects tutorial, but it's just basically one layer of fractal noise, which you can get from your effects and presets panel here. So you can type that in, fractal noise. And using dynamic twist with a spline based noise type, and you could change that up to soft linear or linear or block. You can get a lot of different interesting looks out of this. I adjusted the contrast and the brightness a bit to, you know, do different things to the noise. This is all just stuff that I just played around with. You can come in here and do a lot of different things with fractal noise. Here in the sub-rotation settings here, I alt-clicked on the stopwatch to go ahead and add a expression down here. And it's just time times 2. So it's just taking the time parameter, which changes every single frame, and it's just multiplying it by 2. Did the same thing on the evolution, multiplied that by 60, and that's just giving you a really nice movement of your evolution and your sub-rotation, which is causing all those details to kind of sort of move. And then we're using Video Copilot's Color Vibrance here, which is allowing us the ability to just quickly color this any way we like. Come in here and we can change the hue to make it more pronounced. You know, we can do things with the brightness here to go ahead and make it brighter or darker. Here in your project settings, you also want to make sure you set up the 32-bit. What this is going to do is it's going to give you a very high dynamic range image and play with the colors here. So these whites are now super white. They're brighter than white. Something like Nuke you would actually here in After Effects you can see it as well. So you know, some of these whites here are like that blue is above 1. So we've got a super hot blue here. And so in something like Arnold, these high values are going to give you brighter light in these areas. So your scene is going to, of course, get much hotter in areas where you've got these really super whites. Now, all of that was rendered using Control M here is the keyboard shortcut to go ahead and add your project to your render queue. And there's a particular reason it's not working for me. Okay, so with Control Alt M, that brings up Media Encoder, which will allow you to export this out. And I typically use Media Encoder, especially when I'm doing some final draft type things, mostly because Media Encoder, especially here in CC 2014, supports a lot more formats than After Effects does. So you have a lot of export formats like MXF, OPA, which is really good for exporting out to your editors in Premiere Pro, or DNxHD, which is really good for editors in Premiere Pro as well, and also has a built-in alpha channel as well. It's one of the very few video formats out there besides Cineform and Apple ProRes that has like an alpha channel built into it. But so that's Control Alt M, and Control M should bring up our regular render queue. But for some odd reason, it's not actually doing it for me right now. So we'll leave that alone. But let's see, we could add this to the render queue here manually. So we go ahead and go into our export and add to render queue. And in here, for Arnold, we probably want to render this out as an EXR or a TIFF sequence. That is going to give us that floating point that we can have all that color information. Because if you save this out as a PNG or a JPEG, it's going to be an 8-bit format. You're going to lose all these super whites. You're going to be left with a color value between 0 and 255. You're not going to get any of the hot lighting that you created here. Alright, so it's very important that you save these out in a high-res format. EXR is really, really, really good, and Arnold loves these. TIFF is also extremely good. As I was saying before in some of the previous tutorials, the TX format is kind of sort of a specialized TIFF format that just includes tiling, which makes it extremely memory efficient. So you would export out as a TIFF sequence. You may not want it to save out a subfolder like this, so you can click on the little triangle here, change it to something like comp name. That'll only save out just the comp name. Automatically gives you these nice number marks. You're probably getting used to these by now. And you would just save that in your folder of choice. So for me, I saved it into Forest Walker, and I saved it under pre-renders, and I saved it under Fractal HDRI, and it just exported all that stuff out. Alright, so coming back here, see that we have a EXR sequence of a bunch of fractals. And so here in the test of Forest Walker scene, what I did was I used my Arnold Sky, and I loaded the image in here, and by default the Arnold Sky is going to use, if you load in a texture of course, it's going to use the actual C4D bitmap shader. And so with the bitmap shader, of course, if you're a Cinema 4D user, you're probably pretty used to this. You can actually go into animation here, and you can just calculate out the animation. And so if you select one of the images and you go ahead and calculate out the animation, it's going to automatically go ahead and calculate all those frames for you. And you have a actual animated HDRI in the background to light your scene. Alrighty. So using that technique in After Effects, you can pretty much take all of your After Effects knowledge and capabilities. Andrew Kramer, Video Copilot, makes an extremely excellent series of tutorials about After Effects, and does plenty of motion graphics things with that stuff. So there's lots of cool abstract types of backgrounds and different things you can put together and just follow his tutorials in 32-bit mode, and use extremely high levels of color, and you'll be able to get some extremely awesome lighting out of your scene. And because this is a flat image, it renders exceptionally fast. So because you're not doing it in full 3D, you're saving a lot of time, and it allows you to make your scenes more detailed as far as other objects that can't be done in 2D. Alright, so that's one way to go about actually creating an HDRI. Another way I recently kind of sort of stumbled upon myself dealing with another production that I was working on is to actually use Photoshop here. So in Photoshop, I guess I'm a little bit behind on the 3D features in Photoshop, but here in Photoshop, if you were to create a new file, and if we go back to After Effects really quickly and look at our HDRI here, one, it's 32-bit, and two, it's 4096 by 2096. So it's got a equirectangular dimensional to it. The width is half the height, and they're using a classic kind of sort of this actually should be 2048, interestingly enough. But one thing I've told some of the guys that I teach on a regular basis while I'm actually working with them, 1024 is kind of your magic number. This is basically 1K. And so if you're looking to do something like a 4K by 2K map here, just simply multiply 1024 by whatever number you're trying to use. So if it's 4, multiplying that by 4 is going to give you 4096. Multiplying it by 2 is going to give you 2048 actually, not 2096. So small mistake here, but it didn't really hurt the map any. But and this map wasn't really, this is not really equirectangular anyway. It doesn't have the distortion that would cause it to be a actual true sphere. So as we move up, this map is basically going to break. We're not going to really get as great a tiling of this map. See how it kind of sort of stretches at the pole here, and see how we've got like a really hard edge there. But because I was viewing this scene from only one location here, I wasn't really too worried about it being fine, it having those seams and stuff like that. Using the Photoshop technique, however, we won't be able to do an animated HDRI necessarily in here, but we'll be able to actually make it truly equirectangular with all the nice little seaming and stuff like that, and we will get something that actually wraps really nicely in our Arnold Sky. So let's go ahead and use our 4K dimensions. So this is going to be a 4K HDRI map, basically. And that's going to give us a nice rectangle here. And let's just check our image mode and make sure we're in 32-bit. And this way we'll be able to paint super whites here in Photoshop. Which means now we could actually go ahead and paint in white. And we could actually choose a color that's hotter than white. So instead of 255, we could actually, go up to like, 5 times the value of 255, or even go up to like 10 times the value, and basically we can get these really extremely hot super whites going here if we wanted to. Or if we go below those values, we'll start to get something more along the lines of gray here. So yeah, now we're getting like a 50% gray. So you can paint with super hot colors if you wanted to, super blue, for instance. So that's one way. Another way, of course, is you can actually start to bring in your own images here, and then start to use their levels to bring them up to super whites as well. But a really cool technique is to use the 3D capabilities in Photoshop to actually go ahead and paint one of Photoshop's spheres. So we can go ahead and create a new mesh from layer, and we go ahead with a mesh preset. We can go ahead and use a sphere, and that's going to go ahead and drop us into Photoshop's 3D layout if we're not already in it. It's going to ask us if we want to go ahead and drop into the 3D layout. And once it does, it's going to leave us with a kind of sort of a viewport here with a nice sphere. And so if we click on the sphere and we just move our mouse, we can rotate around. If we hold Control and we click, we can go ahead and pan. And if we just use the Alt middle mouse here, we can go ahead and zoom in on the image like so. So what we can do here in CC 2014, and we might be able to do it in CC, I'm not entirely sure, but you can double click on the sphere material and it'll actually bring up your texture map. And if you set your image initially to be equirectangular like that, then the resulting map that you get is also going to be equirectangular as well. And because this is mapped to a sphere and the UVs are set up in this way, this map is actually one-to-one, like perfectly distorted for a sphere. So you're basically at this point painting an HDRI. So if we go ahead and just grab our window and kind of sort of drag it over here till we get this blue line here, we can kind of bring this up into a 2-up mode. You could also come here to Window, Arrange, and do 2-up horizontal or vertical here as well to bring these both up at the same time. And over here we can start to paint, and over here, as we save our painting on this side, we can see how it updates here on our sphere. We can get an idea of what our HDRI map looks like. So we could come in to, say, somewhere like Google and go ahead and grab a maybe a planet or some clouds or something like that. I'm going to go ahead and grab a few planets that I downloaded off of Google for a project that I'm doing. Alrighty, so if we drag the planet in here into Photoshop, it's going to give us our place mode, and we can go ahead and place the image wherever we want it. Hit enter to get out of place mode, and that's going to go ahead and put the image down for us. We can use the magic wand here to go ahead and select that area, but if we're in 32-bit mode, which I believe we are, we can't actually use the magic wand. It's not supported in 32-bit. So we can use the quick selection tool instead, and come in here and just quickly go ahead and select our black like so. And if we go ahead and use this little button down here in the layers panel, we can go ahead and create a mask. And I believe it actually selected some of the areas that I didn't want. So let's go ahead and Alt and deselect like the actual planet here. And then we'll go ahead and select this area again. And that's going to give us that nice outer sphere. If we do a Control-Shift-I, that's going to go ahead and invert our selection. Come up here to select and use inverse as well. Note the keyboard shortcut here, Control-I, Control-Shift-I. And we can create a mask now, and that'll just mask off the black. And so if we were to save this smart object, we'll see on our sphere that that'll update quite nicely. And so we can see the distortion perfectly. So this is going to obviously be a sphere that's going to cover up our scene, somewhat of an invisible sphere of sorts that's going to cover up our whole scene here in Arnold. And you know, we could build this up. We could add some nebulas from whatever pack we might want to use. There's this pack called Cosmic Pack 2 out there that has some really good nebulas and gas giant textures and different things like that. But yeah, you could go ahead and put stuff like that in here. You could go maybe on Google, download some clouds, start to all the cool things you can do in Photoshop. Basically build up clouds and build up planets. You come into this planet here, for instance, and Just go ahead and grab your selection, and you could use your gradient fill tool to kind of just fill in only the selection here, and you know, that would basically fade out your planet a little bit. You know, so you can create a kind of sort of foggy atmosphere kind of sort of thing. Add some clouds and so forth and so on, and once you're finally done, you can go ahead and actually save this file out as a TIFF or an actual HDRI here. Because it's 32-bit, you now have the option to go ahead and save this out as a radiance format. You can save this out as a true HDR, full 32-bit, and light your scene in Arnold that way. So I opted, of course, to light my scene using the After Effects technique. Just keep in mind, and if you're really good with Photoshop and you're really good at painting, then you know, and there's dozens of tutorials on Photoshop to do all sorts of cool effects. So, you know, just look for something like abstract painting in Photoshop, or abstract galaxy nebula in Photoshop, or anything like that, and you'll pretty much find something really cool that you can use as a kind of sort of matte painting in your background to go ahead and light up your scene. All without having to go buy a DSLR, buy a fisheye lens, and kind of sort of bracket your own scenes. Not to say that those techniques are bad. Those techniques are very great for getting realistic lighting as well. And I highly recommend, if you haven't looked into how to do bracketed HDRIs, or how to use a tripod to go ahead and take a 360 of your environment, your room, or the outside of your house, or, you know, a place that you're filming for a film or something like that, I highly recommend you take a look into that. It's you know, how to create HDRIs basically, or stitch HDRIs together, panoramas together. It's basically what you'd be looking for. And there's plenty of guys who've done tutorials on that. I do a tutorial myself, but my DSLR has long since been forcibly misplaced, so fortunately I don't have the equipment to go ahead and actually take HDRI panorama at the current moment. That being said, I think you can even reprogram the iPhone to take a limited kind of sort of multi-exposure image of sorts. Multiple different exposure images, and then you can combine all those together and create a panorama out of that, and then use that as HDRI here in the Arnold as well for some advanced lighting. But alrighty guys, that takes care of chapter 11, where I was talking about the lighting on this scene. Chapter 12, we're going to go ahead and actually delve deeper into this temporary scene. I'm going to show you how we've got this soft atmospheric effect going. So if you've ever wondered how you're actually going to get shiny rays behind your text, coming off your text, or how you're going to get some trees to be covered in fog, different things like that, the next tutorial is for you. So see you guys there.